Thank you, gentlemen, and Merry Thursday Christmas, Anthony. Thank you for that update. We'll catch up with you guys a little bit later in the show. Right now, welcoming Thomas the Dank Engine Wasson.
The freight engine. Here we go.
Just the freight engine. There you go. Just call him the freight engine. There you go. Now we found it. We've got it now. Hey, host of Loaded and Rolling, author of Loaded and Rolling. What's going on, my friend?
It's been a pleasure. Had Mike Bowden Digital on earlier, and was a super exciting time just getting to talk about trains. And by trains, I mean intermodal. And so imagine you're a trucking executive, and every time you always ask a person when they're younger, what are they like? Trains. So you become a multi-billion-dollar CEO, person, and it's like, I'm going to go into trains, because it turns out after interviewing with Mike that when you run a trucking company that is not only related to the business cycle, low margins, high equipment upkeep, extremely hazardous even in the best of times, when you get a bunch of extra money from record earnings, you go into other things like trains. And so, when we're talking about intermodal, there's two types. There's domestic as well as international. So if you're Canadian, you love the international, you make a deal with the steamship lines. If you're domestic like us, it comes off the ship, goes into a warehouse in Los Angeles somewhere, and then it either goes on a train or by truck. Problem was, during the pandemic, we had so much stuff we bought, it went by truck. But now that things are cooling off a little bit, trains, as slow as they may be, are finally catching up at the
and it was also, there was a push for that because of the spread between truckload rates and rail, right? There was a huge savings going into contract rail over truckload at the same time, right?
Exactly. And so when you're looking into that, you're thinking about it like 10 to 15% savings, as well as the fact is environmental social guidance. These initiatives, these ESG initiatives, are becoming a huge factor for not only trucking companies, but people who ship things. And so it's looking a lot more attractive because investors are saying, hey, find cleaner solutions. And so if you do it by rail, it is about half as much fuel surcharge and about 4 times as fuel efficient in terms of one train versus a flotilla of trucks that are polluting the environment.
I was going to say, as far pound per pound, it's always been cleaner, right?
Exactly.
The rail has always been cleaner since they moved from coal to diesel, probably, but which has been, I don't know, a couple weeks. But
still doing it in China.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of different things, dynamics that are at play here that are changing things from truckload over to rail, or really keeping rail elevated and slightly up over the dropping volumes in truckload, right? One of those is urgency, right?
Correct. And it'll take a few extra days if you go by rail. Back in my broker days, we used to put it on the rail, and then they'd find out and they get really mad, and they would say, why would you?
Even though they didn't need it.
Yeah.
Right? Even though you're still going to make the same service, they would freak out. I remember that.
It's because they just wanted, they knew that what happened is you goosed your margins by a few extra $100, and then it's like, how
dare you make money?
How dare you make money and find trucks for me and trains? Darn you. And so what you're seeing is J.B. Hunt, Schneider, Knight Swift, everyone is migrating because intermodal is now considered a growth category. And so it's strange to think that, but when we do that by growth, we mean that now that levels are returning, the opportunity becomes make a deal with the railroad, become best friends, provide them with containers. We see that with J.B. Hunt, which is a huge part of their business now. Like, you think J.B. Hunt Trucking, well, here's some trucking, here's some dedicated, here's some intermodal, here's some power-only options. So, we're seeing large trucking companies, if they're able to, diversify into these other things because it's a defensive play. We talked about in the carrier updates, we got a lot going on. There's a lot of movement, there's a lot of volatility, and so if you are a billion-dollar company and you have all that extra money, why would you put it into a very risky play, which is the highly cyclical trucking market, or let's just buy 10,000 extra rail containers. They're 53 foot, by the way. Don't get them mixed up with the
internationals.
The international ones. And so
mostly 40s, international 40s and
40
20s.
foot. And then they got to go. That's why we talk about warehousing space and supply chain. It's important because it has to get transloaded somewhere and go from either international container, warehouse, put it on an intermodal, throw it on the rail, or send it over via truckload. So that's really the cool part. It is. I think that a lot of people don't understand that intermodal has such a huge play and such a huge impact on trucking. And if you manage to control the containers, you can control your own destiny.
Yeah, and China makes them all, but just saying.
They're still dumping via containers.
Yeah, exactly. So what about trailer on flat car? Is that a popular thing? Is that growing right now, or is it mostly just the international, the containers?
Trailer and flat car, the orders are for, especially the domestic guys, are for the 53-foot that you just stick on and you kind of stack them on top of each other.
Yeah,
so,
just the straight up containers.
Yeah, that's when I spoke to Mike as well, was that when you see these trucking companies, they're all sticking with the domestic. And then they're making changes because BNSF is big with JB Hunt. Especially on the western side, you're seeing some carriers change around just because if one of them has a preferential deal with the trucking company, it means they can't haul your intermodal trailer, so you may need to get more access to a different part of the rail network just to be able to grow your own organic one. And that's the coolest thing I learned. Like, some of these rail companies don't have their own containers. They just let the trucking companies, other carriers, handle that, and we just provide the train.
Yeah, they don't have their own assets.
BYOC, bring your own container.
Bring your own container, bring your own. Yeah, it's interesting times right now because, like you said, things are coming in and then they're transloading to a larger, like a 53, or some of those are coming off and going right on the rail and just not hitting the warehouse anyways, right? But you're also having a big uptick in LTL. Right now, LTL is on fire. You talk to the 3PLs and LTL and the LTL carriers, it's on fire. As the economy starts to slow and truckload comes down, naturally there's more LTL because shipments are smaller.
And we're seeing that activity where trucking companies are also buying LTL partners. We saw that with Midwest Motor, a bunch of other folks getting bought out by large trucking carriers. It kind of reminds me of back when, Cornelius Vanderbilt, he built up the whole, they had Carnegie Mellon and all these old school barons and tycoons. They went upwards on the supply chain. They bought all methods of, so when you have a bunch of extra money, the supply chain can be viewed like top to bottom, and you take one rung, well, let's just buy above us and below us, and so we'll buy the LTL carriers that'll help us with our warehousing that we then convert to truckload that we may need to put on the rail. And so we see that with the largest trucking carriers. It's definitely a thing of where a tale of two carriers. Smaller trucking companies are happy enough to pick it up off the railhead and have your way bills and all your other fun stuff, and just hopefully I'm not stuck there for a few hours. Larger ones, you have this integrated operation system where you're offering multimodal means of transport, and that's kind of where if you see this consolidation and growth, it's really fascinating. Because my original theory was, why not buy more trucks? This market's super hot. Well, you couldn't buy more trucks because of if you look at the recent Class 8. Manufacturing, recent Class 8 numbers, holy cow, hold my beer. It's not looking too hot. So
there were salsa trucks.
Yeah, exactly.
All salsa, no chips.
Where do you go from there?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the big question that, we're starting to see in these earnings reports. Let's just buy some other forms of transportation.
Well, I mean, you need the diversification. That is certainly true, and you need those partnerships, and I think we're seeing that right now. We have reports on different carriers of different sizes and the impending bloodbath of, this carrier's hurting and a smaller one is not, because of the relationships that they built and the way that they took care of their customers at the very beginning and negotiated those contracts and kept those things. So relationship is always very, very important.
Oh yeah, and the relationship is always important so long as the money is right. Just remember that a lot of shippers right now, they're probably thinking, I remember the last 2 years where I got not a good deal. Now it's time to deal or no deal. And by the way, if you can't make a deal, it may also mean that your company is going to have a hard time. So leverage as well as relationships are going to be super important. Another thing to keep an eye on, as these companies are expanding into LTL spaces and intermodal, pay attention to the autonomous truck piece, because if you make a hub and spoke method just like an LTL doing the middle mile with autonomous, which is a lot of folks are doing right now, that's almost the next play. They're building this foundation, they're building this skeleton, and then they're going to see who's going to be the winner when we finally find a truck that won't get flooded in Arkansas, because weather right now is the biggest concern for autonomous vehicles. That's why the Sun Belt has been the predominant site for testing.
Yeah, no doubt about it, And there's plenty of those trying to work those that hub and spoke into the long haul truckload as well, so to speak, right? Where you walk in, you drive into a market like Atlanta, drop outside the market, and then it moves via driver.
Yeah, and it's doable. It's just a lot of work, and a lot of companies don't have the operational chops to pull it off. Just get a bunch of local drivers, find some empty trailers. The rest will work itself out.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem at all. Hey, thanks so much. We'll catch up with you a little bit later. You have a wonderful rest of your day. Sir, right now I'm going to toss it to a quick break.